Hey man, I'm Fisk. I trade goods of all kinds. If you ever need anything, you're in the right place here.
Have you got armor for me as well?
Well, I'm sure that I can satisfy you.
Hello guys, I'm Audioman, and today I would like to take a look at some brand spanking new images from the upcoming Gothic Remake. These were made available by GameStar and quickly started making their way around the internet. Now, while it's only a couple of screenshots, they carry a lot of information within them, and as such, I think it'd be interesting to take a look at them and figure out what they can tell us about the game. First of all, let's talk about the armors. We'll begin with the oddball item and discuss what appears to be a medium variant of the Temple Guard's armor. Or for my American and British friends, the Templar's armor. As we can see, the armor made a pretty nice transition into HD, with its general design and many nice smaller details, such as the belt symbol, remaining intact, though more than a couple differences as well. The armor lost its nice shine on the metallic parts and now looks more grimy, which I'm actually on board with. The two places where you can find the Temple Guards are the Swamp Camp and the Old Mine. Therefore, it will make a lot of sense if the armor wasn't all clean and shiny, seeing as they are either staying in the constant humidity of the marshes or the dusty atmosphere of the mine. If I had to have a complaint, I would have said that I missed the elaborate engravings on the metallic parts, and also the middle section of the armor looks very bulky in comparison with the original, making the Temple Guard look a bit like a barrel. I think some slimming down around the belly would be in order, but other than that, it is overall a stellar job. Now let's move over to all of the old camp guard armors. Up front, I'm going to have a common criticism for all of these. The color red, which is the identifiable color of the old camp, has been severely muted. We're going to be talking about the color palettes more in the next section, but for now, let's just go over the designs and the execution. Starting with the lightest version, we can see that it's a pretty faithful recreation, just with some added detail. I like this one a lot. The only thing I'd change is the stats on the upper armor. They seem so tiny that they're barely visible. But I guess you could say that it's a tiny complaint. Now, let's go over the medium guard armor. Again, tiny stats, but otherwise no complaints. It looks nice and realistic. Speaking of which, while these faces are probably not final, they still look pretty good and I wouldn't mind if they were in the final game. Moving on, we have something a tad more interesting. We can see two variants of the heavy guard armor, one of which has the Shadow Beast beam chestplate from the original, and one of which does not. In all likelihood, the Shadow Beast variant is reserved for Taurus, who's the leader of the guards, while other high-level members, such as Jackal, Cutter and Asgan, will be wearing the blank variant. On this note, some people speculate that the man shown in the screenshot may therefore be Taurus himself. It wouldn't surprise me, and I probably lean towards that as well, but it doesn't have to be him. I guess we'll have to wait for more info on that. Alright, now that we have the armors out of the way, let's take a look at the locations, the first of which appears to be the Ore Baron's wine cellar, a place with its own unique flavor in Gothic 1. There is a secret passage leading from the market, which we will discuss later, I promise, into the cellars with all sorts of crates and barrels in them. We can even find two skeletons inside one of the rooms, one riddled with arrows and one stabbed with a sword that we can steal. This gives us an idea of how the Ore Barons deal with those who steal from them, again reinforcing how brutal the world of Gothic is and what kind of system the prisoners have put in place. Gomez is the most powerful man in the colony, and he and his gang are not to be trifled with. Overall, I find this design to be quite satisfactory, and I hope that they preserve the darker aspects of the cellar. I expect to find no less than 2 skeletons in it, to be riddled with no less than 6 arrows and stabbed with at least 1 sword. The next location that we can see is probably Stone's Smithy. And here I'll have to be less positive than beforehand. While I overall think that this design makes sense, a creeping weakness starts to be revealed here. Remember how I mentioned that the colors on the guards' armors were muted? Well, it seems that this is another case of all the color being muted or drained away from the original. The old Smithy was full of rich brown as well as the vibrant orange from the forge. Also, I can't help but notice that Skip, who's by no means a likable character, is in the shadows, while Stone, who later turns out to be quite a helpful ally, is surrounded by warm colors. Now, I don't think that this was in any way intentional on Piranha Bytes' part, but I think it mattered nonetheless for the sensation it gave the player. You may have not noticed it, but your brain did. And as we go over these next locations, we really need to start talking about colors. As you may have noticed in my previous video on the subject, I have said that the world of Gothic is dark, bleak and realistic. But Audioman, why are you complaining then? Well, my dear viewer, just because the world depicted in Gothic is generally dark and bleak, this does not mean that there aren't any spots of color in it. All the factions have their own color-coded outfits, with the new camp sporting blue, the old camp sporting the aforementioned red, and the swamp camp sporting beige. This allowed us to easily identify the faction that someone belonged to, even from a distance. Many human-inhabited locations, and especially the old camp castle, had color in them. The red roofs, the bright fire sources, the rich wood, but here, and in the next locations, the color palette seems to have been reduced to beige, dark grey, and maybe some greyish brown. Furthermore, we can see in both the Smithy and the market area, which is otherwise a great HD update to the original, the lighting used throughout the game seems incredibly overdone. Now I can't say I don't understand the reasoning behind this. This stark, bright light tints everything grey while simultaneously shrouding everything beyond it in darkness. And if Gothic is dark and bleak, then I can see how the developers arrived at the conclusion that this would match the original. However, this is a very unfitting style for what Gothic was trying to achieve. It seems to imply that the colony is actually located in some scorching desert, with the blinding, blazing, burning sun blasting everything into beige dust. It looks a lot more like Mad Max than Gothic. Despite its bleakness, Gothic was by no means set in a wasteland. We can often see vibrant plants on the riverbanks, and overall the colony is a very densely forested area. While this isn't the most luscious grass that you have ever seen, it's by no means sand. And this Mad Max look is especially pronounced in the newly enlarged arena, which, if I'm to be honest, I don't like it. It makes no sense for it to be this large. I'm not sure if the redesign was perhaps made with the new combat system in mind, which, if it isn't designed for fights in close quarters, that would be its own can of worms. Let's just focus on what the problem with going this route is. To preface this, I like expanding locations when it makes sense. And you have to be careful when operating on someone else's world because it requires a very deep level of understanding of that world. And this, unfortunately, seems to be lacking here. The arena in the original seems to be tiny for one of two reasons. It was either a pre-barrier construction built by the Royal Guards, probably as training grounds and repurposed by the convicts, or it was built by the inmates themselves later on. This rendition, however, is very clearly meant to be a combat arena, and it seems to have been built in a somewhat crude fashion, pointing to the latter. It boggles the mind how a bunch of inmates managed to construct such a large arena, especially with most of their labor force being focused on the mine, which is literally the lifeblood of their camp. Though I suppose the perspective may make it a bit bigger than it actually is. Still, we can see that the color palette is down to beige, grey, and even more beige, while the original managed to work in some variety even in such a basic location. This makes me really worried that each area that we see is going to stick to this beige palette, and I must say, this is really not the way to go. Now, before you click thumbs down and leave a negative comment, let me just state this. I'm not saying that because I hate the project. I love the potential that this game has, and in order to help the devs reach it, we must be honest in our criticism. This is our one chance to get this series back on track after Gothic 3 and Forsaken Gods and Arcania, or Arcania, nobody gives a shit, have derailed it so badly that many folk don't even remember what the original Gothic was. It was a story of a guy sent to prison who wanted to get out. It was set in a tiny forested valley with a pale blue sky and a nice bright sun. One of the few things pleasant and certain in this unpleasant and uncertain place. I hope that with this piece of feedback I was able to provide the developers with a somewhat concise collection of my thoughts on the latest images, and I hope that they know that I am not saying this to disparage, but to encourage. I want to encourage them to make this game as good as it can possibly be. Now, can it be perfect? Probably no, but we will have to see. And who knows, the original Gothic isn't perfect, and we still love it to death. This remake from a young and promising studio may just turn out to be the beginning of something great. I'm Audioman, and I will hear you next time.